is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Immortal Great Souls series, Book 1, Chapters 45 through 47, and the tail end of 44 from last time. In this episode, we are going to talk about... honestly, there's a lot to talk about, but mostly I want to talk about Naomi and what's going on with her, because I was not expecting this to be so emotional. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. So the fact that I actually didn't get into the classes last episode worked out really well, because what we focus on a lot in chapter 45 is one of those particular classes. So I'm going to talk about the first couple classes that they go to at the end of 44. And it was mentioned earlier that because of all of the panic and the emergency situation with what Imogen had done to Bastion, they weren't having classes. It was nothing was like going according to normal plans. But things have come down enough that they are able to return to the classes. And we start this day off with them going to get their breakfast, and it's like the first time that we get to see the way that the distribution of the treasures and the pills and stuff works. So it's interesting because Leonshi says, back in business, looks guest life is returning to normal in Bastion after all. And it was a sort of a weird, like, the way that it's written, I was a little bit confused, because they're filling their plates, and when she says guest life is going back to normal, Scorio says, "What's this about? I thought the food was free." I didn't understand why he asked whether the food was free when he says, "What's this about?" I didn't get what was like. I am assuming that maybe this is a different breakfast than the ones they were having when they were in the midst of the emergency situation. But it's not really said explicitly. And they just, Scorio says, "I thought the food was free." And Leonshi says, "It is free." And Leona says, "But the quality can vary widely. There have been days when the food is no better than soup and vegetables. Hard times those days. Sucks the joy right out of you." And Leonshi says, "As I was saying, this is the treasure line." Okay, so is it getting in line after we get our breakfast? That's the thing that he was confused about, because he thought they were just going to go sit down, and it looks like they're waiting to check out, basically. I'm imagining this is like when you go to IKEA and you have their little cafeteria, and then you all have to go to the register before you can leave. Okay, Dan's saying that's what it was. Okay. I had a moment of just like, what's the problem? And Leonshi says, "You present your badge, which reflects your ranking, and are given the according treasure, supposedly. They often run out or have trouble buying them or something. Not too surprising, given that there are almost 500 of us great souls. Must cost a lot of octs to keep us supplied." I'm just saying, I don't think that sounds legit. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is purely a supply issue. This whole setup and the way that things are distributed so unevenly feels sus to me. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't have time to dwell on it. But I just don't trust the way the school is run in general. That's not to say that I don't trust some of the teachers, because there are a few that I'm sort of like, you know what, maybe you're all right. But mostly teachers aren't like directly involved in the running of a school. They are just given a job and they are expected to fulfill those duties. So I'm kind of giving some folks the benefit of the doubt that if there is something going on, they aren't aware of it, or if they are aware of it, they have done what they can and given up, or they just don't have any power. I don't know. So the lowest rank 300 have badges with 1 notch and get black star pills. Next 100 have 2 notch badges. They get fat crickets. Leon, she says, don't judge, they have a real kick. And I was glad that Leona said she did not just say that afterward, because I honestly did not pick up on that joke. And then I felt silly for realizing what it was. And then glittering sage, and then luminous ghost dust. Then you're at the top 25 in the whole class, said Leonis dourly. That's where the good stuff is really doled out. You know, I'm going to look up this word because he says dourly in the audiobook, and I had always pronounced it dourly because it's spelled the same way as sour. And I assumed that it was just because English should work a certain way. I also am aware it doesn't. So it is pronounced dourly. All right. This is I'm so glad to hear that, Dan. Dan says he always pronounced it dour like sour. Yeah, according to this, it's dour, like I closed the door. So it's like door. I'm saying dour with more of an oo sound. Seems like it's the pronunciation of door. This is one of the other few words that I noticed he uses a whole lot in this book. I'm checking now. 23 instances of use, and it is in this chapter 44, it's used twice quite close together, and used again in chapter 47. And he just has a tendency later on to, and when I say later on, I mean later on in the book, he's using words much closer together repeatedly. And my guess is that the further on in the writing he got, and this is just a guess because some people don't write in order, but I wouldn't be surprised if like the first section of the book got more attention with editing because you're going over that far more frequently than you do the later half. But it's the sort of thing I could see not picking up on if you weren't reading your work out loud to yourself, which is something that I can't emphasize enough, what a difference it makes to actually hear your words out loud, because you will realize some shit is very poorly phrased or just inelegant in a way that it doesn't seem to be on the page. But yeah, door and brutal are his two favorite words. I'm going to put those on the, top 5 list. So there's a bunch of other elixirs they talk about and everything, and they get one of every pill if you're at the top of your class, which is, as Naomi points out later, a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you give all of the people who are already at the top the best stuff, of course they're going to do incredibly. It really is fucking stupid. I just really want to point out how idiotic that practice is. It's moronic. I'm so sorry, but that's that on that. So Leonis received a black star pill. Leonci was given glittering sage. Naomi and Scorio both showed their blank badges, and after a moment's hesitation, the proctor gave them each a black star as well. And it's, a start. It seems like he's not sure if he's supposed to give them anything. I'm curious about whether or not that's a problem later, but it doesn't seem like it. So they talk about their classes coming up. History of Bastion, which Scorio is pretty interested in. And Naomi talks about the 5 phases. And she says that she didn't sit in on classes because Leonis is like, oh, you know her. And she's like, no, I was allowed to sweep the classrooms beforehand, and I hid in the one of the like alcoves and could listen in, which is just so sad. Like, and she says, we're into Red Peace, named for the destruction of Imperial House Naga. And I'm not going to get into this because this is the sort of thing that I know for myself I will not remember, and I am going to probably not need to know by heart until a little bit later, if I ever need to know it by heart at all. But there's a talk about how this one guy died in the pits of ebullience. And she says, whatever, hell is weird. When he died, Hydra was forced by Basilisk and the Charnel Duke to sign the Accord of Indemnity, whereas no great soul over the rank of Blood Baron can claim direct control over Bastion and its political bodies. So, what's this to stop an Imperator? Nothing, really. The other Imperators? Asked Leonis. Custom, said Naomi, looking down at her bowl. I feel like we've really learned in the past 10 years how much relying on custom is ineffective in the long run. We need things in place for this. And the thing is, how can there be things in place for this if Imperators are the top level of power? But also, you're out here creating Imperators, though, by giving the top level people top level elixirs and pills. So maybe that's sort of your fault? I don't know, I'm just saying. Anyway, I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. They go to their first class. I love when they walk in and Leonis sees everybody looking at Scorio and is like, "Hi, everyone. I know you've been, like, really affected by my arrival." But this is when Hera comes in. And she welcomes them to the class and is very much like, I don't care that you're late. You're going to have to keep up anyway. You're going to have to learn everything that everybody else learned, as well as the shit that they are learning right now. So I need you to find some tutors, but I bet that's not going to be too easy for you. And she fully believes nobody's going to volunteer. And then a bunch of women volunteer. It's all women. I wouldn't have minded if a dude had been just thrown in there because, you know, nobody knows. But the fact that he is getting all of these volunteers, he gets very, like, blushy and embarrassed. And it's interesting because, like, the way that this writer has written Scorio, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate it. There is, like, no male gaziness at all in this book, at least so far. And I totally love that. But at the same time, it also does make me kind of be like, does he even, like, notice women like that? You know, is he maybe just ace? And everybody that he's around he observes as, like, a person separate from any sort of romantic or sexual relationship. Like, I don't know anything about what draws him. And there's no indication that he has an attraction to Lianxi or to Naomi beyond their skills and friendship. So these women are just, like, throwing themselves at him, and he doesn't seem happy about it. And it's not clear if it would be welcome from any of them, you know, based on, like, looking around, is there one particular girl that he'd be into? Versus Leonis, who, this man is a man of the flesh. Leonis is definitely out here trying to party and get some pussy and eat a lot and probably get in a fight and then go to bed, and he will consider that a really good day. And I'm fully behind that. But I also, it just throws into even sharper relief the fact that Scorio doesn't seem to care about that at all. But anyway, there's a moment where Lianxi is, like, whispering to him out of the corner of her mouth, and the teacher tries to, like, do a gotcha, but Lianxi is able to answer the question without even, like, pausing about it. And I just love whenever somebody has that kind of ability to, like, pay attention to two things at once. I can sometimes do that, and it's a weird, you know, because, like, Owen, there's no way. He can barely focus on one conversation, but if there's another one going on at the same time, he has checked out, you know. That's one of the difficult things. If we're at a restaurant and the people behind us are talking loudly, I cannot have a chat with him because he is hardly hearing me over the people behind him. So they go into sparring and forms with Instructor Feng. And Lianchi says, you'll like him. He's fair and very impartial. I think it's because he thinks we're all equally terrible. And Scorio says, sounds like someone Naomi could like, but she flushes and looks away. And at the time, I'm just taking this as him sort of dogging on her a little bit and her just not really being a good sport. But once you know what's going on a little bit later, it takes on a completely different vibe. So it's stadium seating, and Feng comes in, and he wants to fight both Scorio and Naomi in front of the class and get a sense of what they are able to do. And he has this power that slows you down and also pulls that speed from you and gives it to him so that he can be even faster, which is so unfair. The thing about most of these powers is that they seem very unfair. So Scorio goes up, and long story short, he does pretty well. There's a point where it seems like he is almost going to connect. Very, very close. And you can see that Feng has a shocked look for a moment where he didn't expect Scorio to get that close to actually striking him. However, Scorio took that shot that almost connected and didn't, at the expense of leaving himself wide open, hoping that he would be able to make that connect and leaving himself open wouldn't matter. But because he failed, it did matter, and he winds up being laid out. And yet, despite this, Feng seems impressed. And he also says that, you're maybe the fact that you let your temper get ahead of you is part of why your heart was only burning for a short time. And Scorio is sort of wondering what he means by that. And later on we find out that there is something about the coal mana that he has taken in and the fact that he overdid it with these elixirs that has resulted in damage being done. And he now has to find a way to undo that, which that sucks. And that's what those lines are. I had thought the lines were maybe some sort of like inscription that was the next stage in progression, but it's actual fracturing. It seems like. So that sucks. So this is when Naomi goes up. And it is really, really... I listened to this section twice. And it is really... Listening to it the second time makes you sick once you know what's going on. When you don't have that context, it's just sort of funny. Because Naomi is like kind of pulling out all the stops. And it seems like she just really wants to prove something because she has this chip on her shoulder that she's been carrying for a while. And it's a moment for her to show what she can do. And it seems that when she isn't able to land a blow, she takes it in a way that feels very much like she is, again, being a bad sport. And then you find out what's actually happening here. And I'm going to just jump ahead to that conversation that she has, because Scorio, he can tell when she comes and sits down that she is not in the mood for anybody to speak to her or reach out. I really appreciate how good he is at judging when people just kind of need to be left alone. He does this later with Leonis as well. And when they get back to their rooms, she just goes into hers, and he's standing outside knocking, and she's not answering, but he can hear something. And I was like, oh no, she's crying. And sure enough, he goes in, and she is crying. And it starts off with her saying, I wanted to beat him. I wanted to show him I was worthy. And I was like, yes, this is what I expected she was upset about. it does seem like she's reacting a little out of proportion, but this did mean a lot to her and she's been carrying this for a long time. But then she says, he mocked me. He was one of them, Scorio, who refused to train me, who said I wasn't worth the time, that I wasn't a true great soul. In front of a class just like that, he told me to go back to cleaning. And they laughed. They laughed at me as I walked out. So numb, I felt like I wasn't even a person anymore. I was so miserable I wanted to die. And when I had the chance to prove him wrong, I didn't even hit him. He just played with me, laughed at me, and then he broke me down, humiliated me by forcing me to stop, to give up, till there was no way to fight him. And Scorio, understandably, is like, but that is what his power is. And you got him, like earlier he says something like, you got a great soul to have to use a technique on you, which is a kind of a compliment. But she says, I've never seen him do more than check his students with it. Ask Leonis and Leonci. He saved his full power just for me. And when she really said that, I stopped and was just like, Jesus Christ. Finding out that he had mocked her like that is already hideous. But when you go back and read the way that fight shakes out is so gross. And I'm going to go back a little bit. Feng stretched out a free arm and caused a burst of white dust to flow forth in a cone. And she stood as in the center of her own personal blizzard. Feel free to concede whenever you like, he said, tucking at his robe with his free hand to smooth it out. Which, saying feel free to concede whenever you like, in that tone, when she almost got the better of you, sir. Fuck you. You're out here trying to save face and make a joke out of her because she is actually a badass. And even though you are several levels above her, she's showing potential that you tried to pretend wasn't there, and you don't like being proven wrong. That's how I'm reading this. With each passing moment, the Nightmare Lady moved ever slower, as if she were drowning in honey, and Feng moved commensurately quicker. Soon, he wasn't even bothering to block, but simply ducked casually under her blows, stepped brazenly within her guard to tap her throat with 2 fingers, and otherwise displayed his mastery of the combat. And also, when he's out of her line of sight, she forgets he's there. So she gets confused and looks around, not understanding what's happening. And eventually, she sinks into a crouch, and she is so slow that it's said like a child could walk past her and not be worried about it. Now, Feng says, not a terrible first technique. These are the words he uses. It feels like it's not but the actions feel very petty to me. They really, really do. And I can't help but think also that maybe he knew she was going to come at him with a certain energy. And so he was prepared to use his ability because he knew she was going to have a real desire to actually hurt him that the other students don't have. That's just a guess. Also, this made me think of something else, and it's obviously not applicable in Naomi's case because she didn't attach herself to the spire. So this is her first life. But these students having regenerated a bunch of times, the teachers, how long do they live? Have they dealt with the same students repeatedly for hundreds of years? So if you've got old beef with a teacher and you regenerate, is your teacher still pissed at you for shit that your version didn't do? That feels like a real shitty position to be in, where some, old maybe it's an issue where it will happen every time just because your personalities don't mesh, and so it's inevitable that you are going to butt heads. But there may be times where it's just there was a misunderstanding, and now this is a grudge that causes them to treat you differently for the rest of eternity, which does seem unfair. But Dan says these teachers fucking suck, and then a teacher still being around when someone reincarnates is very rare. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure how long they live. But anyway, Scorio says, all right, well, if what you say is true about him, there's only one thing we can do. Get strong and kick his ass. And she sort of frowns at him, and he's like, I mean it. We'll get so strong that one day we can come back and you can show him what you really think. And she's like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And he does a little bit of a pep talk of like, shit's not fair. And everything has been against both of us from the beginning, but we're going to fucking do this together. And she says together. And I just really love the fact that it seems like, opens up here in a way that she has been unable to do. She wants, like, it has always felt like she wanted to, but she was afraid to. And the fact that Scorio is just out here like, all right, well then fuck this guy. We'll fuck him up, right? It's just done something and opened her up in a way. I'm not saying she'll be like a different person now, but I feel like this has opened up a level of trust, And also the description of her crying and the way that it's like coming up out of her gut. I just know that type of cry. It's an old trauma and something that you haven't dealt with. And she thought she was going to have a certain outcome here. And not only did she not get the outcome she wanted, but she got toyed with yet again, which is awful. So yeah, the whole thing, I just really felt for her. And fuck this guy. And I really hope that they tell Leonis and Lianshi about what Feng did to her, because Lianshi is over here being like, he's very objective, he's a decent guy, and I want them to know what he's really like. I really need them to be on the same page as everybody, So let's go into chapter 46 here. We go to mana studies, and this is when Scorio finds out about his heart and the damage done to it. There's a description of some treasures. A shard of rock, copper shavings, a cube of gray metal, and they all are setting off a particular type of mana that he can sense, and the ways in which they have like different perks to them. But it's such a bummer for Scorio because like he's so excited to finally sit down with a pro and find out the quality of his heart, and finding out that he has done the kind of damage he has it's such a come down. It really feels like he got brought thudding back down to earth after getting his hopes up here. So she asks him to share what he knows about mana. I'm not going to get into that all again, but there is some talk about Imogen and how she burned up her whole heart, and that it has basically corrupted. Because he's like, but she said she still loved her husband, and she's like, yeah, she could say that, and she could even believe that. But do you think that her husband would say the love she showed is the same love he knew? Does that sound like it was, like she's definitely changed? And I really appreciated that, because just because somebody says they love somebody, it doesn't mean that's valid or even really true. And she, Hera is like, and since you actually saw the way that she was, that's going to be a really good reminder for you for what the consequences are if you decide to completely fuck yourself and burn up your heart, because you got to really see that madness firsthand. So, she mentions also about how the next stage that they're going into is that they are going to reach a point where they begin to recover their memories. The 4 trials. It is forbidden for Cinders to learn the details, but each trial reveals a facet of your original past. It is a process of rediscovery, though what you learn may shock you, disappoint you, challenge the person you are today. Regardless, these recovered memories are what ultimately drive students to Dreadblaze and possibly beyond. And Scorio just takes a moment to reflect on the fact that he has been so desperate to survive in the moment and to get his power levels up that he really hasn't even let himself consider what his past was, who his parents were, where he's from. Like, there's just been very, very little of that because he has had much more immediate problems to deal with. And I'm really curious what that's going to be, how this works. And it's also, it's sort of fascinating because, like, in Cradle, there is an advancement that depends on you actually finding the true reason that you practice the sacred arts. And it's like, if you don't have the self-awareness to come up with the correct answer on what your motivation is, you will simply never progress. The self-awareness is absolutely essential to you getting past a certain point. And this, she's talking about how there are going to be things revealed to you. And she says that where most great souls find their natural choke point is that they are unable to reconcile the person they've become today with the host of memories they've inherited. They stall out, not from lack of desire, but from an inability to collapse their former and current selves into a new whole. Which is really wild because, like, it's one thing to have self-awareness about your current state, but it's another thing to reconcile actions that you made that you don't recall. And you are finding out about them without actually having, like, yes, technically you committed those actions, but, like, you didn't specifically. And that feels like such an unfair standard that I can understand why a lot of people might just stall there. There's a part of me that's like, is that even fair? I don't, but I also find it interesting because the whole concept of reincarnation, like when you talk about karma, people use the word karma incorrectly all the time. You know what? I'm going to look up an official, like, definition of karma, because what people usually say is that karma is just you getting the rewards that you reaped, basically consequences of your actions. And it's almost always, like, expressed in this very petty, like, what goes around comes around kind of way, which is a gross oversimplification of what it's meant to be. And okay, yeah, in Buddhism, Hinduism, and other religions, the force produced by a person's actions in one life that influences what happens to them in future lives. So it's not about, like, the world is fair ultimately and karma comes around and deals out. It's a life that you don't remember that has nothing to do, well, not nothing, that's really not true, but it isn't, like, linked with your actions in this life the way that a lot of people try and set it up as. And it makes sense in a lot of ways that we have, like, kind of corrupted its meaning, because we want to believe that the world is fair ultimately. We all want to think that there's a force that's like an equalizer in the end. Because how do you live in a world where, like, bad people can just live lives that are wonderful and they never suffer consequences and then they die? You don't want to live in that world, but unfortunately, like, that's the world we live in. A lot of people do not ever suffer the consequences of their actions. And this is also why we invented the theory and concept of hell. But yeah, what they're dealing with here feels like karma. Because it's like a past life, So it's a much more literal sort of interpretation of that. And it's just kind of interesting. I'll be very curious to see what his deal is. I'll be curious to see what everybody's deal is. And it's extra fascinating because Naomi won't have that. She's not part of the Spire. So she's just clean slating it. And that feels like she got off lucky a little bit in that sense. So anyway, this is when she sees his heart and is like, okay, so there are some problems here. It's heavily fractured. Coal will do that if used in excess. You vent a good portion of the mana you take into your heart before you can burn it. You've got patterning that indicates severe moments of stress that your heart wasn't strong enough to absorb. So earlier, when, you know, the Imperator soul was like, I returned your heart to the state it was in before you joined this fight, it wasn't, I healed your heart. It was just, your heart was already fucked up. So I'll put it back to like that level of fucked up, which I don't know if Soul could have just healed it, but I wish he just fucking did. Soul, you know, I don't know. It feels like you could have just done that, but maybe he couldn't. And she says, right now you're venting almost a third of everything you draw in, and that amount will go up the harder you push yourself. Think of the current practice you're doing as jumping up and down on the edge of a crumbling cliff. Your best bet is to simply stand still, but even that won't undo the damage you've already done. And he's like, there has to be something I can do to heal it, with this tone of like, oh God. And it's like, she is sort of talking in this theoretical way and doesn't consider how totally like devastating this news is going to sound to him. And she sort of comes back to herself and she's like, oh, of course. Yeah, no, you can heal it. But the thing is, you're going to need some stuff that are like some pills that we don't have, that we can't just like give you. You are going to have to get the patronage of a major house in order to get your hands on this stuff. And, he's like, well, they've already chosen their people. And she's like, oh yeah, but you think that if you don't, like, if you roll up and really get their attention, they're not going to be like, oh, we already have somebody. They're going to try and get you anyway. You got to find a way for them to notice you. The easiest way is to petition to enter the double elimination tournament. I'm not sure how they would insert you, and probably Naomi, but if you enter and win enough combats, you'll draw attention. And he asks, is there any other way? Hera pursed her lips and considered. Accomplishing an impressive gauntlet run at the end of the semester will draw attention, but you'll be hard-pressed to stand out amongst your cohort as a cinder with a fractured heart. If you proved exemplary at your academic studies, you might earn a recommendation from your instructors, but given how much material you must cover, that will prove challenging. We've many motivated and very intelligent students who are already excelling in class. So he's like, all right, well, I guess that's the only thing I can do. And I don't regret what I did. I had to in order to get here. But, yeah, I guess I have a new fucking goal to work towards at this point. And I appreciated her being like, just to point out, I never said you had to win the tournament. You just have to be noticed. And I was like, okay, yes, thank you. Because I definitely was hearing win the tournament. So I just needed that to be pointed out because I absolutely would have missed it. He even asked, can I raise the money myself? And she gives him this look of pity and he's like, okay, guess not. She says, let's focus on restorative techniques. I want you to close your eyes and envision what I describe next. Scorio did as he was bid, felt his heart pounding in his chest, pounding fiercely, like an outraged prisoner clamoring at the cell door for his freedom. It's not fair, he thought. I'd not be here if Praximar hadn't hurled me through the final door. I'd not have been left to fend on my own, forced to drink toxic elixirs to... But with an act of will, he banished his fury and bitterness. The sooner he stopped expecting fairness from hell, the better. Do you guys know, and I think that I've mentioned this before, but there is something that is... So, I don't know exactly what the terminology is. But it is basically described as a mental problem to have a preoccupation with fairness. And there is like a term for it, and I wish that I could recall how it's like described, but it's essentially seen as being a signal that you may be neurodivergent. It's been linked strongly in autism as well. And I just think it's really remarkable that wanting things to be fair and being very like concerned with that is something that is so far outside of a reasonable expectation that this is labeled as like a sort of disorder. I just, it's frustrating to me in a way that feels like you have just given up then on the concept of even trying for things to be just and fair. I don't get why you want to live that way, But I just wanted to point it out, and the fact that he's like, I just got to stop expecting it. It's probably true. And it probably will lead to him being overall like a happier person if he can manage it. But it makes me so depressed. And also, he does not actually get himself to like enter this frame of mind, because it's very soon that he starts to have the same like, but they can't treat us like this if they don't treat others this way. And I was like, bruh, I thought that you had already like understood, But anyway, all right. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit here. There's a lot more study. And they go to, let's see, Instructor Rex. And this is really fascinating. So I really enjoy, you guys know that like there are times where I can't picture how a character looks. And then there are times where there's somebody that just enters my head and I can't get them out. For me, I have Hera in my head as, I think Gillian Anderson, who played Dana Scully. I have, at this point, it has like, I've turned a corner with Leonis, and now I am full on picturing him as, oh my God, Aquaman. What's that actor's name? I'll never remember actor names. I'm just going to tell you who they played, and you're going to have to go and do your IMDb search to figure out who I mean. But yeah, he's Aquaman. I cannot, for the life of me, decide what Lianshi looks like. I don't have a good grasp on Scorio either. And I have now put Naomi as Zendaya. I feel like she would be really great as the like emaciated nightmare lady, because she's very, very tall and super thin. And this guy Rex, absolutely immediately, because everybody else that I mentioned, it took me a little time to kind of come to a conclusion on how I picture them. It didn't take any time at all. This man is Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad. And that is the end of the discussion. That's who this is. And I will not hear anything said different. This guy sets up these battlefields that he creates teams and they have to move through. And Leonis is very serious about this in a way that everyone is a little surprised at, because it doesn't feel like there is philosophy involved in this that seems like it wouldn't suit him. But actually, if you step back and think about how he became more satisfied with his life sooner and so stopped pursuing advancing it further and more power, it actually does kind of make sense that things about philosophy are speaking to him a little bit. And also the fact that he is in charge of their group here. He's the one that's leading. And when he leads them wrong, he takes it so personally as like an indictment of his overall abilities and how much he has let everybody down. And it's illustration of the same thing that we saw in the gauntlets, where he will just throw himself in to defend somebody, and he'll be one of the first ones taken out because of the fact that he just leads from the back, which is great. That's like actually a super admirable trait, but he has a strong reaction to the failure of their group here. And the whole way that this goes, I won't get like blow by blow into it, but suffice to say that the place is set up to look like it's got solid walls. And it turns out it doesn't. Claws exploded through the painted wooden boards, grasping and clawing at Leonis and Lianchi in the center. They reacted swiftly, but were hampered by the close quarters. The claws passed through their chests and necks, and both flashed as red light flooded over them. The Nightmare Lady threw herself right at the wall and burst through it, crashing into the next room, and laid about her with her tail, slashing and decapitating a number of shadowy foes before being mobbed by dozens more who simply piled onto her. Scorio ignited his heart and sharpened his dark vision as he leaped in right after, striking and tearing foes off his friend, but there were too many of them. "That's it for your team," said Rex from above the walls. "Move to the side quickly now." And again, Lianchi is like, I think we did almost everything right with the way that we approached it, but we just took the walls at face value. And Naomi is also blaming herself a little bit here, because she's like, I was in the ruins where rules like this are almost identical. You can't take anything at face value. And I have already forgotten that shit. So my bad also. And Lianchi, she slips an arm around Leonis's waist and is very concerned with him beating himself up. And I was like, look, I don't want to try and sexualize physical acts of affection. But also I was a little bit like, is there something going on with these two? Or just, you know what I mean? And Lianchi says, go easy on yourself. And Leonis says, go easy? There's no time for going easy. Or more accurately, all I do is go easy. Which I thought that was an interesting line. He doesn't ever seem to fault himself for having a good time. But there is often a sense of him not being aware of it. And that line points out that he is. And maybe he's judging himself a little more than I thought. In moments like these, I need to do better. I need to show my quality. I owe it to myself, to my past, to... He cut off and turned away, frowning, and I was like, to who, Leonis? Who do you owe it to? To Lianchi? Because you like her? Is that what you meant, Leonis? Do you like her? I think he might. I think that might be what he was saying. Anyway. Eventually, he kind of calms down when everybody's like, look, we learned a thing. Let's just take that to heart. And Leona says, I want to come back for next semester, not be shipped off to some half-assed outfit. And Scorio was like, wait, we don't get to come back? And I love the way that this is phrased. Lianchi says, remember, I think we mentioned it ages ago when we had our second lunch or something. And that very much felt like the author just being like, yeah, this shouldn't be news to you, but you probably forgot. And I was like, thank you, because I definitely did. You only get invited back if you're in the top half of the class. The 50% that does the worst doesn't get to continue training. Which is, once again, fucking insane. What? It just feels like a complete waste. I don't know. The whole thing is just, I don't get it. I just don't get it. So there's a moment where Lianchi makes a joke about how we'll make it. Scorio, you managed top 18 on your first run. We have Naomi now. If we can convince a top student to swap in for Leonis. And I really could have told her, this is not the time for the joke, man. Like, he's just taking it so seriously, and it's way too soon to, like, josh him about it, you know? And he gets very offended, understandably, and is like, well, I stayed in the tournament longer than you, so don't mock me too much. And she says, I was just joking, Leonis, come on. Yeah, I know. But still, he turned away to stare morosely at the battlefield wall. Listen, he's the one who went down first in the gauntlet originally, and then in the one that you guys did at the ruins. Acting like he's the weakest link is already what this guy is thinking about himself. It doesn't feel like a joke. I 100% believe she meant it as a joke. There are some people that would say this sort of thing and they'd pretend they were joking, but they were a little serious. I don't think that's the case with Lianxi. I feel she 100% was joking. But she is joking about something that is already his sort of like deepest fear about himself. And there's just no way to you can't do that. You just can't do that. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting because we just so rarely see Leonis get super invested in things. And the way he reacted here really stuck out. So eventually they break and they go to eat. And we go into chapter 47. Before eating, though, I forgot about this. So they go, in chapter 47, we start off in the pool, everybody cooling down. And Scorio has shared with all of them the deal with his heart and how he's going to try for a house. And he clearly wanted Naomi to throw in with him and be company for him. But she has no interest in doing it. She doesn't want to be beholden to anybody, which really makes total sense. But I also kind of wonder if she isn't going to feel like she needs to be with Scorio in a way that is going to change her mind. I don't know. Part of me is I'd love for them to be able to do this journey together. But another part of me is maybe it's better to have somebody outside of the whole thing that you're still close to and can rely on. And, part of me wants her to care about Scorio, to make an exception to the thing that she thought was an ultimate truth about herself. But then also I like the idea of her sticking to her fucking guns and not changing it up for anybody, because she really has this hard drawn line in the sand that is her boundary that she won't break. And I would respect that. I don't know what I want. And so we'll just have to see. But they talk about how Scorio is going to try and join into the bracket of losers instead of going for the winner's bracket, because he is definitely not in a position to compete with any of the people at that level. A lot of them are at Emberling already, and some of them may have even gone past that. So it's the talk about well, do you think that the Hell Whip will let me in? And Naomi is you should have already talked to her about it. The longer you take, the less interested she'll think you are, and the less likely she'll be to make last moment adjustments. And Scorio was you think I should go now? Oh, okay. And so he just goes to her place and she answers the door and she's sweating. I really thought it was going to be that she was fucking some teacher or even another student. I definitely took it as this bitch is fucking. And it turns out that she's weightlifting, which is great. And it's fascinating because she doesn't need weights. She's able to create the weight using mana, I guess. And so he comes in to speak with her while she's weightlifting and is made a little uncomfortable by it. So she's doing squats as they're chatting. And I love this. The Hell Whip took a deep breath and suddenly the bar sagged heavily into the muscles of her shoulders, causing her knees to flex before she straightened out once more with great effort. Keep going, she grunted Helminth, and with a deep breath she slowly lowered herself into a crouch and rose smoothly once more to standing. It was only then that Scorio saw the cracks radiating out from where she stood, the stone floor looking like a pane of glass that was about to shatter. This is amazing. I love it so much. And as somebody who did weightlifting very consistently for several years and hasn't, it was very inspiring I was sort of like, you know what? I gotta bust that out. I have a whole home gym here that, you know, when dealing with the puppies and everything, I was not in a place to pick that up again. But I've started running again, and I feel like now maybe is the time. I may need to get that rack set up. And he presents his case, but Scorio found himself staring, and she powered back up, her muscles straining, and half turned to stare at a scroll hanging beside her office door. "That's it?" she asked, voice tight with effort. "No, I mean, I'd like to enter the loser's bracket." Scorio resisted the urge to cough into his fist. And he keeps standing there, staring at the scroll, and I really couldn't tell. I think it's just being impressed with her power, but there's a big part of me that kind of was like, is Scorio into this? Like, you know, I've been saying that I'm not getting the vibes off him that he has been interested in anybody, but what if he is just really into strong women and this is doing it for him a little bit and he doesn't know where to put his eyes because, damn, you know, I would very much understand it. Highly recommend following women weightlifters, not bodybuilders, but weightlifters on Instagram, because you get to see some wild shit. These women are so strong. And there's one that I saw recently where this woman set a record. I don't know if it was a personal record, or if it was something that was like I think it was in a contest, but she was doing a deadlift and her nose started spontaneously bleeding because it was just like such an intense lift. Anyway, she is like, yeah, I'll fit you in there. And he, it says, Scorio held her gaze for a moment, then began to feel mildly uncomfortable under her appraisal. It was very direct. And that was another thing where I was just sort of like, there's something about this, man. I don't know. I can't tell if there's anything sexual about it at all. And then when she tells him, use the days remaining before the contest wisely. And he says, right, of course, I'll apply myself. Thank you again, instructor. Hellman smiled against the lip of her cup. The silence drew out once more. Then her smile widened briefly in amusement, and she gestured with her other hand. You're welcome, Scorio. Dismissed. He bowed low, heart thumping, and hurried back through the reception chamber and out into the hallway. I'm just saying, I feel like he was not prepared for the hotness of this bitch weightlifting. I am very into this theory, and I really don't want to be shaken on it at all. So I am just going to absolutely cling to that. And that's just me. So this is when we go to breakfast the next morning. People are staring at him. They're all like reassuring him that you don't need to pay attention to that. Somebody's going to pull some crazy shit soon that everybody's going to be talking about and they won't even remember you anymore. Oh, sorry. Dan is in the chat saying this is like one of those Reddit threads, which are guys that have, which are guys with blatant message. Oh, guys, what blatant messages have you missed about a woman being into you? Yeah, it was like, I couldn't tell if she was like trying to, like, if she knew that she was having an effect on him, if she was trying to have an effect on him, if she is sort of into him a little bit and is just kind of like, maybe I'll throw a little something out there to get his mind in the right spot. You know, I don't know. Apparently, Scorio's attractive because all of these women are out here raising their hands on him to tutor him. So yeah, I don't know. But I'm very curious. I also have been picturing, I don't remember if, I think I recall Helmuth being described, her physical appearance, but in my head, she's a black woman. And I don't know where that came from, but I'm sort of searching around for like an actor that I feel like could fill this spot well, because I need somebody who was like incredibly jacked, you know? So there's a moment here where Leonis tells Scorio Helmuth is proving surprisingly helpful in all this. And Naomi says nothing is freely given. Look for the hidden dagger. And it does sound very dramatic. I don't blame Leonis for being like, girl, you need to calm down. However, she's fucking correct, though. She's dead ass right. And that is a fact based on what happens in a minute. So this is when we get the talk that I had mentioned last episode being like, when is it going to occur to Scorio that there are still people out there who can't even fucking like have a roof over their heads at night? And this is it, because Leonis is saying like, are we not fortunate? We've got the best food and are treated like royalty and yada yada. And Naomi says, didn't you see the people we helped in Ward 3 last week? And he says, of course. And I lament their situation. But why should I suffer just because they're going hungry? Should I starve and weaken myself because I'm fortunate? And she says, no, but it feels wrong to be dining on this kind of luxury when there are children out there begging for a crust of bread. And that I appreciate, like, because, you know, Leonis is trying to make this into a false dichotomy. That, like, either you don't care about the poor or you starve yourself. It's not that either or. It doesn't have to be that way. And Scorio mentions the gruel fountains, and Leonis legit doesn't even know what that is. And he thinks they're kidding around and realizes they're not and says, that sounds hideous. And then perhaps we can start an initiative of some sort. See if we can't convince the administration to donate some of the Academy's food to those in need. And Scorio is like, yeah, definitely. Like, we should do something like that. And he says, it's not right we dine like kings while others starve. Well, I could intend to continue dining like a king, but there's no reason we can't help others at the same time. Naomi sighed and shook her head. I feel on her, like, I align more with her. You can have your delights, Leonis, but maybe not every day. Maybe not as like standard fare. What if a candied rock crab were maybe a once a week, once a month, instead of a, you know, part of the regular buffet? That's all I'm saying. But I'm glad this came up. And it was really remarkable to me that Leonis didn't even know about like the gruel fountains and stuff. It makes me think that their education here has been very selective. And also that, you know, we know that Scorio never let them see where he slept. They just don't seem to have any real idea the poverty people are living in. You know, her being like, did you not see the people we helped? And him saying, yeah, but then not knowing about the gruel fountains, then he didn't really see, you know, he just didn't quite get it. So this is when Corrigan comes over. And Corrigan is like, I know that you're getting all this fucking, you know, people are really gassing you up over the part you played with Imogen, but I heard that you sided with her at first and you just like turned on her when you realized that she was going to lose. And Scorio is thinking, how would he even know that? And I'm like, I'll tell you how he knows that. Praximar told him somehow. And this is a setup. Like, it really feels to me, the whole thing feels like a fucking setup. And I'm assuming it's Praximar because he's a fuck, but maybe it's not him. I don't know. I'm just saying that that's what it feels like. And Scorio gets up, and there's a moment where he's thinking, should I try to explain myself and plead my case? And instead, he chooses to headbutt this guy. And I've got to say, I really appreciate later on when he's talking to Naomi and she's like, you did the right thing because there was no arguing with him. In this moment, when he's thinking like, should I plead my case? That would absolutely be my instinct. I am always desperate to be understood by people. I will over-explain anything if I feel like you are not getting my motivation behind it, or if you took it in a way I didn't intend. Anything that is like possible for me to try and get across with language, I will attempt it. And so I am very much like a perfect target for sea lioning, which is sea lioning. For those who don't know, you're probably aware of the word trolling when people come into comment sections and just act like assholes. But sea lioning is somebody who pretends that they are almost at the verge of understanding, but they present an argument that seems good faith on the surface. And as you continue to discuss it with them in an attempt to change their mind, they keep moving the goalposts and changing up the thing they have an issue with until you've spent like half an hour replying in comments and you're not even talking about the thing you started talking out. But, you know, like, as, again, somebody who wants people to understand, I have fallen for that kind of thing a lot. And it's just meant to exhaust you and be like, it's not good faith. So in this moment, when he's wondering, should I try and explain myself? I could see that was the wrong choice. But I had to admit, it's probably what I would have tried to do. And so when he headbutts him, I kind of laughed because it's such a dramatic response. But also, yeah, this dude isn't going to fucking hear you. There's no point trying to explain yourself. You're just going to come across as an equivocator. You're going to come across as somebody who is like weakly attempting to justify themselves, and that comes across as more suspect. But just proving the fact that I am not somebody that you come at with this energy, that is, in my opinion, the way to handle somebody who's trying to bully him, which is what this is. However, it quickly flies out of control because, like, Kurgan thinks... I think Kurgan knew he was about to get beat up because, like I said, I think this is all a setup. But apparently, Scorio thought Kurgan was a cinder, and he's not. He is a emberling, and he is able to transform now into this fucking creature. And he's very snake-like in this form, which makes sense. And Leonis tries to, like, step in. And Kurgan almost slices this dude in the face and just barely gets stopped by Naomi's tail as she transforms into the Nightmare Lady. And they eventually get pressed to the ground by the force of Helminth, who's coming through. And she says, now I know that Emberlings aren't starting a fight in the mess hall. Helminth strode through the crowd toward them. Her tone was amused, genial almost. That would be an absurd flouting of the rules, something unheard of so deep into the semester. And I was like, I really don't want her to be the one setting him up, but the fact that she's amused the way that she is, I was almost like, does she not like Kurgan and is glad to have seen him get fucking headbutted? Like, I genuinely don't know what to make of her being, like, having the attitude she does. So they basically are summoned to her office. They're all asked to give their version of events, which thankfully match up. And Helminth is just like, dude, look, Kurgan took responsibility, but you were the one who struck the first blow, and this is exactly the type of shit that you have fucking got to not do if you are looking to get somebody to sponsor you. Do you have anything to say for yourself? And Scorio just says no, and she says, all right, then get out of my sight. She takes away Kurgan's 8th day privileges, basically has him grounded, but then she takes Naomi and Scorio to the principal's office to speak to Praximar, who is absolutely fucking elated. Like, you could just tell it's this restrained glee. He is trying to pretend, I'm so disappointed in you. But I don't believe for a moment that this bitch is surprised they're here. He knew that Scorio had a temper problem and was like, just go poke at him. And inevitably Naomi will jump in too, so we'll be able to deal with the both of them. And as they're being brought through, Naomi is like telling Scorio, this is Praximar's office, we're done for. Scorio says, done for? But why just us? Kurgan took responsibility. Oh, grow up, Scorio, snapped Naomi. You think we'd be treated the same? Scorio's frown deepened. We have to be. Bruh, you just had this talk with yourself. Get on the fucking page. You don't have to be. That's the whole point. Dude. I really think that there has been a part of him that thought Naomi has been overreacting to her treatment here, or exaggerating it. And now he's finally really realizing the scale of the problem. Which is just, that's the thing with like anybody who isn't part of a group that is targeted in a certain way. They will hear stories and feel like maybe there's room for error in the way the story was told. Maybe the other person's POV would explain some of the terrible treatment and give it context that would make it make more sense or be less terrible. And it's like, no, these people are, they know what their own experience is. And you need to trust them that they are telling their version of events with sincerity and truth, because otherwise you are assuming that they are trying to make themselves into a victim in the situation, which you then start to assign that motivation to the entire group, which is a type of racism. Just, you know, if we're going to be making it about race, which I am in this context, if you're trying to be like everybody who says this stuff happens to them is exaggerating, then you are saying everybody who is from this group and claims these things happen, they're all untrustworthy and all exaggerate and make things up. And what does that say about you that you think that? Anyway, Praximar tells them, you have basically one chance left. And we all knew bringing y'all in here with your shitty records was a problem. We did it because we were told to, but there's not any reason to guarantee you get to stay if you act up. So this was the final straw. And if you fucking cut up again, you're out. And when they leave, it's like Scorio doesn't understand what was said. And he's trying to say to Naomi, like, that wasn't so bad. And she's like, dude, do you fucking hear yourself? They don't want us here. They are setting it up that either you let them walk all over you and you don't say anything and everybody sees you as weak and you're a fucking target that has to fight for your life every day, or you get expelled. Those are your two options right now. We're going to be out of here in a week. So get as much out of this as you can, because the whole thing is doomed. And she walks away, and it's like, it takes a minute for him to really understand that what she's saying is correct. And Scorio, just bless you. Bless your heart, bud. All right. I got to wrap up. I'm over time, but I had to be, because I had to make up for missing the end of 44 last time. But I'm really, really curious what happens, because I feel like now that they're on their last legs, after they've been pushed like this, I feel like it's just going to be a series of people pushing them and trying to provoke Scorio. And he is going to have to find some superhuman levels of patience and keeping his temper, which I just don't know how he's going to be able to do that. Like, that has just not been his forte. Maybe this will be an experience to grow in that respect. I don't know. But anyway, all right, I gotta wrap. Thank you guys again for listening. Thank you, Dan, for commissioning this. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.